So my name is Aaliyah Bennick. I'm the coordinator. If you have questions about the program, please ask me. I'm sorry we ran out of programs, but I will make some copies and hand those out towards the end. This program is very casual. It's kind of an informal lecture series. I think both of our presenters are happy if you have questions during the program to just, raise your hand and they'll get to them, but we will have a Q&A moment at the end. We started thinking about this program because tattoos are so memorable and they are so meaningful to people. We see a lot of young people and hipsters wearing them today, but it's actually an ancient art, and that's really what we're going to explore today. John Troyer, who is with the Center for Death and Society, did a presentation like this a few years ago that I saw, and what I was really interested in was the way he talked about memorial tattoos. And how people get tattoos to mark passings in their life and their life story. And so he'll begin with kind of an overview of the history of tattoos and then kind of get into that particular area of interest with tattoos. And he's accompanied today by Awen Briem, who runs Art with a Point, a tattoo parlor in Minneapolis on Lake Street. So she's going to kind of weigh in with some of her experiences, and I hope you'll enjoy it. Let's turn it over to John and Awen.
Thank you. Awen and I are both really honored that so many people came to hear this talk tonight. So this is fantastic. My name is John Troyer, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Center for Death and Society at the University of Bath. I'm distinctly not British. You might be able to tell from my accent. And in fact, I'm from here. Did my PhD at the University of Minnesota. Bounced around America for a while and was offered a position at the Center for Death and Society. So the work I do is on death, dying, science and technology, and bioethics. And the center in Bath is one of the only in the world. And as soon as they said, would you like to come here, I said, yes, absolutely. And what we do there is sort of what's referred to as interdisciplinary death studies, which is really anything you want to look at. And as a result of that, what I've been looking at has been tattooing, memorialization and tattooing, which we'll see a lot of examples of tonight, and commemorative tattooing. And that's got me into the broader history of tattooing. But the reason I got interested in tattooing, for not necessarily obvious visual reasons, was because I had been going to Awen for years, starting in the early 1990s, to get tattoos done for my grandparents after they died. So I was well into about 20 years of tattooing or so by the time we talked about this. And that was when I approached Awen about 2 years ago. We gave this talk, and that was the first time we really sat forth to try and talk about the history of tattooing. Go ahead and say, you want to introduce yourself?
My name's Awen, and my studio's name is Art with a Point. It's near Uptown at the corner of Lake and Lyndale in Minneapolis. And I've been tattooing for about 17 years. And the way that I approach tattooing is I have a very strong affinity for some of the ancientness of this art and the sacredness of this art. And so I customize the designs that I create, do everything custom. Somebody's welcome to bring me a unique design that they or someone has drawn for them, or we can collaborate together to create your tattoo for you. I don't have any flash, I don't have any pre-drawn designs to choose from, because I believe that it's really important to tailor the art that you're going to wear for the rest of your life. So that's the approach that I take, and I'm just really happy. It's fun to work with John to do these presentations and talk about these subjects, and I want to encourage anybody that wants to ask any questions throughout or share a story, please do. And if you want to share your story but you don't want to say it out loud, you're welcome to write it on a card and pass it up to the front, and we can share your story that way if you'd rather do it anonymously but would like to share.
And I should also say, just this is one of the strangest full disclosures I ever do, which is Awen has done the tattoos. You can see my arms and stuff like that. Just so anyone thinks I'm trying to do any kind of sneaky product placement here. And in fact, these are the tattoos I have here. Very quickly, this is one for my father and this is one for my mother. They're both alive. They're just more in general pieces I got for them, which they're actually very okay with. I think they're a bit skeptical at first, but they're okay with that. And in fact, it was a situation where a friend designed them for me. I took them to Awen, and then she actually figured out how to get them on my skin. And it was because of these tattoos, as well as the ones I have on my back, which we'll see. Awen and I have spent hours and hours and hours together, and then more hours, trying to talk about anything we could, and indeed, we've talked really a lot about the history of tattooing. In the event you're curious about some of the ideas of memorialization and things I've talked about, there's a website that I run as part of my research called the Death Reference Desk. I would encourage you to go to it. We have a whole series on memorial tattoos, and actually I'll talk more about that as we get going into it. So one of the things Awen and I wanted to talk about was actually just some very current examples of just where we see tattoos in everyday life. I was actually just in Hawaii, which is just the way it is, and I was on the beach one day, and in Hawaii, because a lot of people just have a lot less clothing on, you see tattoos all the time. It's just inescapable, any beach situation. And I normally don't go up and talk to people about their tattoos, because you don't want to be that guy that comes up and is like, I really like your tattoo, because it just seems sort of dubious. But there was this woman who was sitting on the beach, and I was like, wow, that's a really amazing back piece you've got there. And I went up and talked to her, and I said, that's way too organized to be random. And it turned out it actually is a memorial tattoo she had done. And the birds are each family members after they died. She's a Buddhist, and she had the, it's a wording there I can't remember. The funniest part was, I said, gosh, I really wish I had my camera, I forgot. And her friend was with her, was like, don't worry about it, here, we'll take a picture with my phone and I'll just email it to you. And so they took a photo and emailed it to me. When I got home, there it was. And this is actually one of the most interesting pieces I've seen lately. This is another one from New Zealand. This is an older woman. I can't remember her name. She's a death with dignity, end of life advocate. And what she had was do not resuscitate tattooed on her chest. You can see it. As a political statement. Now, let me advise all of you. In the ways of the law on death and dying, I do not advise this as any kind of emergency room practice, because any ER doctor that's suicide is going to be like, I don't care what the tattoo says. We're going to have to do that. But nonetheless, it was an interesting political activist use of tattooing. And then we've got one that Awen just did as well.
Yep.
A new piece that Awen was working on. And actually, Awen has a film that was done of that, correct, on your website?
Yeah, we filmed the process. That took about 5 hours. We did it last week, and we filmed the process on and off and then spliced it together and made just a 60-second summary of the 5 hours so you can see her bare arm, and then in the end, the final product. So that's at my Facebook page, facebook.com/artwiththepoint.
Okay, and Leah was talking about the history of tattooing. Some of you will know this. One of the earliest examples we have of tattooing was Ötzi the Iceman, when he was found up in the underneath in the Swiss Alps. Yeah, Alps.
It was on the border of Italy and Austria.
Austria, right.
Yep.
And in fact, on here you'll see where they pointed to some of the tattoos that he had on his body. How many was that?
57.
Right. Awen studied this a lot more. I was just collecting the photos on this one. And he had sort of like these back little back lines. And what was interesting was because you could tell these were clearly done, not by natural forces, but done by other humans. Or someone did them. And there was some strap marks on his arms that sometimes have been confused with tattooing. And then there's an example of a gentleman who decided to get a replication of the tattoos that he had on his back, on his own back. I believe that's an anthropology graduate student.
To add about that of interest is that he had 57 tattoos all over his body. They were in specific places, most of which wouldn't be visible in the clothes that he would have worn in the environment that he lived. And I don't know how familiar folks are with him, but in that case, he was so perfectly preserved in the ice that his flesh was still intact. But when they dated him, he dated back to 5200 BC. So it's the oldest proof of tattooing that we've found so far. And then what's further interesting is that under all 57 tattoos, he had chronic degenerative injuries. So not only is it proof of early tattooing, but it also suggests early acupuncture use, using tattoos as healing or as talismans for strengthening injured areas, so on and so on. So that's kind of an interesting lead-in to a lot of the other history that we'll be talking about.
And clearly demonstrates that Ötzi the Iceman was the first hipster.
A name like Ötzi.
Yeah, Ötzi, yeah. He actually, and there's a whole genre of tattoo of Ötzi the Iceman, actually, I found online, magically. Okay, so this is where we're really going to pick up in terms of how do we come to know modern tattooing. This is the Modern Tattooing Machine by Samuel F. O'Reilly. It's the first electrico-mechanical machine. And this is the machine you all will know if you've gone to a tattoo shop and you've heard the bzzz, right? And what O'Reilly's innovation was to figure out a way to deliver the ink underneath the skin in a way that was not hand-done, but was motorized and with electricity, so you could do a lot more in terms of shading, in terms of color. But a couple other things he did is he made the process a lot faster. And in fact, as a result, it made it actually less expensive than it had been before. And it actually creates a situation where more people can afford to get tattoos than they had before, because before that you had to travel. or you had to go and get a handheld design done, and that took a lot of time. And in fact, you can pull that patent if you want to see it. That's the original patent design off of Google Patents. And the machines themselves have pretty much remained the same. They haven't changed a lot since 1896 when O'Reilly did that. He's in New York, too, I should point out. In New York in what's now Chinatown. Or his studio's in what's now Chinatown. And I should also point out, he made a lot of money off of this. He figured out a way to trademark and patent it and send it out, and it transformed tattooing very, very quickly. I think some people are just anticipating some questions. I have a couple of shots here of people who've done laser removal for tattoos. So here we've gone to the history of how it starts. Here we go to now people wanting to get tattoos. Laser tattoo removal is a burgeoning industry. There are a couple of big companies. Dr. Tat-Off is one of the big ones. And what they say is, they're very clever, these companies. Is that, just interestingly and statistically, it's mostly women who get this, apparently ages 25 to 35. I think along the lines for this woman who was going for a strapless wedding gown and decided to get the screaming pig face taken off her shoulder for whatever reason. Now the thing about tattoo laser removal, and some people have heard this, is actually extremely painful. And it costs a whole lot more to get done than a tattoo. It's about, the number I came across was $39 per square inch. And it takes several different kinds of sessions to do it. And in fact, there's a quote here. One Dr. Tat-Off patient said the procedure was worse than having his crotch tattooed. So whatever and however he had that done, one can imagine the tattooing. This is an example of a gentleman. You guys see the process here with the goggles having his neck tattoo removed by laser. Word to the wise is that it's actually better to do a cover-up. If not, if you can do it, you don't need to get it removed. Unless you want to get it removed to actually do that. Now, in case you're wondering, how many people have tattoos? I'm just out of curiosity here. This is an interesting survey thing to work through. Does anyone here in this room tonight not know a person, not know anyone with a tattoo? Not know it, right, okay. And the reason I say this is because there was a survey done in 2008, U.S. survey, and I think this was through Harris Poll, that indicated about 36% of Americans aged 18 to 25 have tattoos. 40% of 26 to 40-year-olds have tattoos, and 10% of 41 to 64-year-olds have tattoos currently. There was a follow-up on that I don't know how they gauged this, but that about 17% of 45 million Americans who had tattoos in 2003 or so regretted it. I don't know how you come up with regrets, but nonetheless, maybe that's all the people who are going to laser removal that way. So tattooing is very popular. Just out of curiosity, how many people in the room here have tattoos? You don't have to put your hand up. Ink is proud. That's good, all right. That's usually where I try to do some silly thing where I pull my shirt off to show my tattoos, and I opted not to do that tonight. Now, what's interesting about the history of tattooing is that tattooing in America and tattooing in England, to give you two similar countries, actually was something that was only done by the upper classes, the aristocracy, the people with money. And in fact, for many years, it was only the royal family that would get tattoos in England, because they were the ones who would travel to the masters in, say, the Far East, or the Middle East, or Japan. And in fact, many members of the royal family were tattooed. King George had tattoos, both the men and the women. Interestingly enough about this, it's entirely been forgotten. This history, particularly for the Brits, is something that many of them have no idea about. I talk about it now, and they're shocked by it. A friend of mine who works in the Royal Portrait Gallery, the National Portrait Gallery, which has all manner of images of the royal family, that she can't find images of these tattoos, right? But we know they were there. What does change, though, is that once the tattooing machine comes online, you begin to see a shift away from the upper classes down towards the middle and more famous lower classes. Of course, there's tattooing amongst people, mostly men in the Navy, and those who are in the various naval services. In case you're curious about where it stands today, David Cameron is the new Prime Minister of England. His wife Samantha has a dolphin tattoo on her foot. That is Samantha Cameron's foot right there. This had much written about in the British press, as you can imagine, that the Prime Minister's wife has a dolphin tattoo, which is actually rather ugly, but there you go. Now, the Italians take a whole other view on this. And this is a very famous Italian criminologist, Cesare Lombroso. And if any of you studied criminology, you will know Lombroso because Lombroso put forth the idea that criminals were atavistic, that criminality was biologically driven. This is where the deviant, the abnormal individual comes from. And this is his observation in 1896 in Popular Science. This is a translation of what he said was going on in England. I just want to read this so you guys can see it. He says, I have been told that the fashion of tattooing the arm exists among women of prominence in London society. There's a certain breathlessness to what he's doing with this. The taste for this style is not a good indication of the refinement and delicacy of the English ladies. First, it indicates an inferior sensitiveness, for one has to be obtuse to pain to submit to this wholly savage operation without any other object than the gratification of vanity. And it is contrary to progress, for all exaggerations of dress are atavistic. Simplicity in ornamentation and clothing and uniformity are an advance gained during these last centuries by the virile sex, by man, and constitute a superiority in him over woman, who has to spend for dress an enormous amount of time and money without gaining any real advantage, even to her beauty. But it is not desirable that so inordinate an accession to ornamentation as tattooing would be or should be adopted. For an observation I have made on more than 6,000 criminals has demonstrated to me that this custom is held in too great honor among them. Thus, while out of 2,739 soldiers, I have found tattoo marks only among 12%, always limited to the arms and the breasts among 5,348 criminals, 667 were tattooed, or 10% of the adults and 3.9% of the minors. And then he goes on to talk about no study. The reason this is important is what Lombroso wanted to do was demonstrate that tattooing was part of criminality. And his theory went like this. Criminals have tattoos, therefore, if I see tattoos, you must be criminal. And the logic was very good. It worked very well for Lombroso. And he actually pioneered this whole scheme of outlining and drawing criminal bodies with their tattoos. Right, and what's interesting about it is how he always poses his criminals as very classical Greek bodies, in loincloths and things like that. And here's a couple of close-ups. You can see what he does. He's very, trying to be very close about what they say. And a lot of these tattoos I became interested in because a lot of them are memento mori pieces from art history. The idea of remember death. Death is always around us. And particularly with criminals, this was it. But Lombroso was convinced. This was a sign of savagery, and indeed, this is a pure criminal act. This is why the British were totally losing the empire, right? Now, along comes a Frenchman, Alexandre Lacassagne. Lacassagne was actually a former student of Lombroso's, and splits with Lombroso because what Lacassagne says is, no, tattooing is a precious source of information about the moral ideas of the tattooed, their ordinary thoughts, the images that are clear to them, their intimate memories, which are sometimes impossible to articulate, and even their cynically devised projects of revenge. And Lacassagne goes on to say, criminality, abnormality, deviance is not biologically determined. If we think about it today, it's actually a process of environmental effects, right? So here we have the split between nurture and nature. Lacassagne says tattooed people are just simply sad. They're pathetic, right? Italian school, French school, and now we have the German school, and you can actually hear the marching boots of the 20th century approaching in this one. This is by Dr. R. Berg in a Dutch dermatology magazine. The largest part of the world seems to have been gradually occupied by the white races. The natives of the lowest races will die out or be absorbed and thus disappear. Civilization, culture, and we cannot stress too strongly the word culture here, and tattooing are incompatible. What is remarkable is the minimal extent to which this custom in general seems to have existed among the gifted and precociously developed Aryan race, and as also the fact that it essentially disappeared at an early stage. The Sanskrit languages have no term for tattooing, right? And so the German school takes on a whole different way of thinking, which is tattooing. Let's not even talk about criminality per se. It's just a clear sign of uncivilized savagery, right, at this time. These are all 19th century because there's this real kind of impetus to figure out what drives tattoos. As a very important historical footnote to this, one of the reasons that we have so much information about the history of tattooing in the 19th century is precisely because all of these early scientists were trying to document everything they could about tattooing to show how abnormal everyone was with a tattoo. So there's a certain paradox what's become involved. And in fact, the historian at Oxford, Jane Kaplan, who's written some really good books on this. Jane is really the most amazing woman in the world. I actually had a good chance to meet her. And very funny story about that, actually. She just looks like anyone's sort of quasi-eccentric grandmother. Came riding up on her bicycle to me at Oxford. I was like, "Are you John?" I was like, "Yes." She said, "Excellent, let's go talk about tattooing." And I was trying to be very professional with this Oxford professor, and she was ready to just talk about nothing but ink for hours, and we did. But what grows out of this is actually a whole field of what's called tattoo collecting. And this has largely been forgotten, and this is what's really interesting. That men of science, and mostly men, they collected tattoos from the human body. And what I'm about to show you is pieces of skin cut from the body, and there are a massive collection. This is in the Charité Hospital in Berlin. Oh, it's only going to get better. These are dry. I think these are white. These are wet mounts or wet specimens here. You'll see both wet and dry for those of you who are interested in specimen in taxidermy. These are some Polish prison tattoos from the early 20th century that were collected. The Polish government set out a way to try and figure out what they could tell about criminals. Triptych. Mermaid. There's a slightly pornographic one about to come up. There we go. All right, moving right along. Well, they're in prison, you know what I mean. And then this was a tattoo in some olive oil that was just recently found by a gentleman outside of the city of Bath at a basically sort of car sale. He found it, and it was in the paper. He just found this tattoo. So these tattoos are actually around still. A lot of museums have these tattoos, but they don't know what to do with them. Because they're like, we put them on display, what do we say? I mean, because a lot of museums don't know how they got them. This is the problem. And in fact, we're about to look at a museum, the Wellcome Collection in London. If any of you are in London, go to the Wellcome Center, Wellcome Museum, it's free. They have a 350 skin piece collection of tattoos purchased in the 1920s by Henry Wellcomes, who's from Minnesota, actually. Henry Wellcome is a Minnesota boy who went to London and became a very rich man over there. His buyer in France bought them from a surgeon. All of this is completely sketchy. There's very little information. I don't even know how the surgeon got them. But these are the tattoos, and I actually had a chance to go and look at them and talk with the PhD student, Gemma Angel, who is now finally actually creating a catalog of these tattoos. They've actually sat in storage since 1920. Were actually kind of forgotten, but then once they had them, no one knew what to do with them. And these are all dried specimens to give you an idea of the scale. Now these are two back pieces. That's one side. That's the other side. And there they are together. Right. It's a big back, yeah. It's a big back. These are the smaller ones. They're kept just in stacks like that. Now, I have been asked, were they taken from the person while they were alive or they were dead? One assumes this was taken from a person who was dead. If not, he was dead after it was taken. You could have survived that, I suppose. But the smaller pieces, probably from the person who's dead. But this is the thing, we don't know. We don't know. There's very little record keeping about this, and that was really not much of the intention of the men who had them. They were kept as collections to try and understand or glean what you could about the subject. Or also harkening back to an earlier 18th century model, sort of the cabinet of curiosity, in which you lined your space with all these objects to sort of glean something from science and nature. These tattoos fulfilled a lot of the same thing. Right? And they're really remarkable pieces. Now, it turns out, actually, I mentioned before the piece about Germany, the Nazis were doing this too in some of the concentration camps. And actually, these are some photos that were taken during the Nuremberg trial that Life magazine published. And it's believed that part of this was done as one of their campaigns to establish superiority, where the Aryan races, but also for collector pieces.